Sheldon Wolin was one of America's most influential political theorists, a thinker who studied democracy not as an abstract ideal, but as a fragile practice vulnerable to power. In his late work, Democracy Incorporated, Wolin offered a stark warning. The United States, while still calling itself democratic, has in fact drifted into a new political form he called inverted totalitarianism. Unlike the totalitarian regimes of the 20th century, inverted totalitarianism does not depend on a single tyrant or party. It wears the clothes of democracy, elections, courts, legislatures, but hollows them out from within. Power is not seized in a violent revolution. It is absorbed quietly through corporations, bureaucracies, and media systems that manage public opinion. Wolin writes, "Inverted totalitarianism perpetuates itself through the normal workings of the political and economic system, not through terror." Instead of an all-powerful leader demanding obedience, we find diffused networks of corporate and state power steering citizens toward passivity. Where classic totalitarianism was openly repressive, inverted totalitarianism is subtler. It thrives on legality, on procedures, on the appearance of choice. Citizens are not forced into submission by violence, rather they are guided into political irrelevance by the very structures that claim to represent them. By naming this paradox, Wolin asks us to see democracy not as something guaranteed, but as something that can be quietly inverted into its opposite: rule without accountability, power without voice, consent without participation. Inverted totalitarianism is a paradoxical form of domination. It looks like democracy, but it functions as a managed system of control. Wolin asks us to see a political order that preserves the outward trappings of liberty, elections, courts, legislatures, a free press, while hollowing out their substance from within. It is not organized around a single party cult or a charismatic dictator. Instead, power is dispersed through networks, corporate capital, an expansive administrative state, professionalized media, and technocratic elites. These networks do not rely primarily on terror. They rely on absorption, normalization, and the steady management of consent. As Wolin put it, inverted totalitarianism perpetuates itself through the normal workings of the political and economic system, not through terror. At the heart of Wolin's diagnosis is the idea of managed democracy, a system where formal democratic procedures remain but are used to legitimize decisions already shaped by powerful, non-democratic forces. Elections continue, but the range of acceptable debate narrows. Public opinion is not allowed to self-organize so much as it is engineered through polling, PR, targeted messaging, corporate sponsorship, and concentrated ownership of the platforms that set the terms of discourse. Rights and institutions exist, but their operations are routinized, professionalized, and increasingly subordinated to administrative logic and market imperatives. Mechanisms matter. Bureaucracy replaces politics as the primary site of decision-making. Complex rules, classified information, and technical expertises move choices out of the reach of ordinary citizens. Corporations shape policy not as outside interests, but as intertwined governing partners, through lobbying, privatization, revolving doors, and funding relationships that blur public purpose with private gain. Media and culture convert politics into spectacle. Attention becomes the scarce commodity, and management of attention becomes governance. The result is a polity where people are more often treated as consumers and audiences than as citizens, exercising collective power. Wolin's sharper formulation captures the chill of this transformation. Democracy has become a managed democracy, a political form in which governments are legitimated by elections they control. In this arrangement, legitimacy is manufactured through ritualized voting and sanitized choice, while the deeper levers of power, budget priorities, regulatory frameworks, security doctrines, are shaped by insulated elites. The danger of inverted totalitarianism is not only loss of policy autonomy, it is the erosion of the very capacity for self-rule. When political life is managed rather than practiced, civic initiative atrophies, dissent is reframed as noise or pathology, and the space of meaningful disagreement shrinks. To understand this system is to recognize that defending democracy requires more than defending procedures. It requires revitalizing the institutions, habits, and public powers that make democratic self-government possible. Wolin argued that inverted totalitarianism thrives through a close partnership between corporate and state power. It is not that corporations merely lobby government from the outside, they become entangled with it. Through privatization, public responsibilities are transferred to private firms. Through the revolving door, officials cycle between regulatory agencies and corporate boardrooms, ensuring that public decisions serve private interests. In this world, the citizen is steadily redefined as a consumer. Politics no longer appears as a shared practice of collective decision-making, but as a spectacle to be watched, marketed, and purchased. Campaigns become advertising wars, and political loyalty is cultivated like brand loyalty. The media is crucial here. For Wolin, echoing but distinct from Noam Chomsky, mass communication does not simply distort information, it manages perception. It creates the horizon of what seems possible, the boundaries of legitimate debate. Narratives are simplified, dissent is marginalized, and the citizen's role narrows to passive spectatorship. The result is a politics where administrative management replaces genuine deliberation. Decisions emerge not from open contestation, but from technocratic procedures and corporate priorities. Democracy becomes less about what citizens decide together and more about how opinion is shaped, guided, and contained. Democracy under inverted totalitarianism slowly shifts from a lived practice of collective self-rule into a staged performance in which citizens appear mostly as audiences. Institutions remain elections, legislatures, courts, but their functions are increasingly ceremonial, while real decision-making is routinized in administrative layers and corporate networks. What was once civic participation becomes consumption of spectacle. Voting is a ritual, public debate is curated, and political engagement is measured and marketed rather than exercised. This transformation is not merely semantic. Surveillance, data-driven targeting, and the professionalization of public opinion manufacture consent by narrowing the range of plausible debate and by converting political questions into marketable narratives. Citizens are invited to register preferences, click, and consume, but not to deliberate collectively or to hold governing elites to account. The result is political passivity framed as choice. Compared with classical totalitarianism, Arendt's model of regimes that used ideology and terror to mobilize and dominate, the inverted form looks different on the surface. Arendt described totalitarian rule as a system that seeks to dominate every aspect of life through an all-encompassing ideology and organized terror. Inverted totalitarianism, by contrast, preserves legal forms and a pluralistic facade, while hollowing out their substance from within. Where Arendt emphasized mass mobilization and terror, Wolin highlights depoliticization and management. Both diagnoses warn that pluralism and genuine public space are the first casualties, but they point to different mechanisms of destruction. Wolin's account has provoked important critiques. Some scholars argue that his thesis overstates the coherence and uniformity of elite power. Real political conflict and pockets of resistance still persist, and democratic institutions sometimes check and reshape corporate influence. Others suggest Wolin's rhetoric risks determinism, implying citizens are wholly passive rather than unevenly engaged in contestation. These critiques remind us that histories of power contain contradictions. Domination is real, but so are agency and dissent. Still, Wolin's core worry about the withering of the civic capacities that sustain self-government remains potent. When administration, market logic, and media spectacle displace deliberation, the skills and institutions needed for mutual judgment and collective decision-making atrophy. Arendt would add that the disappearance of public spaces for action and speech corrodes the plurality that makes politics possible. Wolin adds that management and privatization convert citizens into audiences and consumers, eroding capacities for resistance. If democracy is to be defended, the remedy is neither nostalgia nor technocratic reform alone. It requires reinvesting in public institutions that enable deliberation, protecting arenas of civic association from commodification, and cultivating practices that make citizens competent and confident in collective judgment. Recognizing the differences between Arendt's and Wolin's warnings helps us see both the overt dangers of terror and the quieter dangers of managed political life. And it sharpens the question every democracy must answer. How do we rebuild the spaces where citizens can act together, not merely watch? Wolin did not end Democracy Incorporated in despair. For him, democracy was never a fixed structure, but a living practice, fragile, episodic, and always vulnerable to being eclipsed. Yet precisely because it is fragile, democracy can reappear in moments of collective action that disrupt passivity. He called this possibility fugitive democracy, the sudden eruptions when ordinary citizens step outside the roles of spectators and reclaim the work of self-rule. These moments may not last, but they remind us that political agency is never fully extinguished. Against the weight of administration and corporate capture, fugitive acts of solidarity and imagination keep alive the possibility of genuine public life. Today we can see Wolin's hope reflected in grassroots activism, mutual aid networks, and movements that insist on reasserting citizen power in spaces dominated by markets and bureaucracy. These are not utopias, they are fragile countercurrents, but they prove that political imagination endures. As Wolin wrote, democracy is always fugitive, always on the run. Its survival depends on citizens recognizing this truth and on nurturing those fleeting yet vital moments when democracy escapes capture and becomes once again a practice of freedom.